Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Sara Stapleton Barrera to the show. Candidate for Texas Senate District 27. Sara, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the first half of your show. Really important stuff. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Now, people have been getting to know you over the past couple of weeks. You've been on live streams. You've done town halls. I mean, you've gone all over the place to talk to the community. They're very familiar with your Democratic platform that you are running on. Now, I say Democratic, and just to tell people who don't know, Senator Lucio is a Democrat, but most of his votes fall along Republican party lines. So there's been a lot of votes where he votes with Republicans. So he is a Democrat. You're also a Democrat running against Eddie Lucio. We're going to get into your platform, but before we do that, I actually want to start right at the beginning of this campaign for you. Why did you decide? How did you get into running for this office? What was the beginning for you, and how did you make that decision?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was sort of a crazy ordeal. I'm an attorney, right? So I was in the middle of a 6-month long jury trial, and it was hard. It was emotional, and I needed to take a little break and kind of do some soul searching and some reevaluating. Figure out, if I'm doing enough to help my community, and where is our system. Oops. So I took a little time, and in this sort of soul searching, I kind of fell down a rabbit hole and fell upon Senator Lucio. And when I started looking at his voting record, I realized this is where our system is broken. This is the break in the chain. This is why we are not progressing here in South Texas. And once I realized where he stood on a lot of his voting record, I had to make a decision. And the choice was either, hey, now that I know, I just sit back and let it be what it is, or I stand up and I fight and I don't take no for an answer. So here we are. We've gotten pretty far, and I'm excited to be where I am.
Right. And I think that that's something that I really connect with, because for me, and I'll admit this on the show, I was involved in organizing and helping the community back when I was in college, and I graduated in 2015 or something like that. And so since then, I have put it down, and I got more into other industries. I started working and got more into the tech industry and business and things like that. And I have revisited from time to time. So, for example, I have volunteered for some campaigns. But to go back to your point, this is all coming together for me as well right now. So everything you're saying about all of this coming together for you, making sense in terms of what's happening in the country with BLM, what is going on with law enforcement in the country, what's going on with everything that we're doing here, and all of this voting record that he's got, the direction of the region basically that we're going in, everything is sort of connecting for me. And you're saying that you had a similar experience, and you were working as an attorney, working on I guess a long case, and that's what got you to make the decision to run for office. Now, you haven't held office before. Obviously, when you made this decision to run for office, you had to put your platform together. Was that something you spent a lot of time on, or did you already know from your experience working in law, this is what we need to do in the region? What was that process like?
Yeah, so I certainly had a sense of, where my moral compass sort of guided me. But I put a lot of work into it and did a lot of research, and really made informed decisions, and and followed smart plans. And it was definitely not just thrown together by the seat of my pants. I mean, it's something that if you're going to run for office and you are going to put your ideas out on the table, clearly you have to be prepared, and you have to show people, look, I know what I'm doing, and this is how we accomplish it, and this is a result that these steps will result in. So yes, it's taken a lot of time and practice, and it's still to this day evolves and grows and just gets better and better by the day.
Fantastic. And before we get into specific policies on your platform, I actually just want to hear, what is your vision for our region? I mean, what's the future that you see for us that you would like to bring to fruition over the next 4 years if you do win?
Sure. Yeah. So, look, the number one thing that we deserve down here is just equality and equity. We deserve to be brought up to the same level as the rest of the state, as opposed to being, the last ones to get the resources, or the last ones to advance in education, or the last ones to advance in healthcare. We just because we're a border town in South Texas does not mean that we are not deserving. I grew up here. This is my home, and about 8 years ago, I was a single mom struggling, trying to make the day to day, just, Pampers and working and making sure I could afford daycare. And at that point, I realized, look, our area down here is not built for people that are struggling to do that day to day. And the inequality just expanded on so many different levels. So that's when I really started noticing, hey, this system is built not to help us, but really to tear us down and to hold us into place. And, I think that's why I went into law and where I am now. And as the years go by and the older I get, the more I see. And we deserve better. And so that's why I'm here.
I see. And powerful words in terms of the system is built to tear us down. The system is built to hold us down. We know as we look into some of the economic data in our region, we have some of the poorest areas in the country at the same time that we have some of the fastest growing metros in the country. So what does that tell you? Is that there's a lot of inequalities. There's a lot of people making a lot of money and a lot of people stuck in poverty. Now, in an area that is as rich as ours, with industry and resources, with retail and trade and all this kind of stuff, that really should not be happening. So I can absolutely see where a vision like that would come from. And so to get more specific on that, what are some of the more specific policy changes or programs that you are going to be championing, that you are going to be pushing forward in the office if you were to win?
Sure. So we need overhauls all across the board, but I'll focus specifically on education. We have leaders and legislators that say, well, children are our number one priority, and, the children are our future. And okay, well, let's put our money where our mouth is, right? I mean,
right.
Any politician that you talk to will claim, well, we just spent $6.5 billion on our children's education. Great. I mean, that's a start, but, Texas has like a $250 billion spending budget. We've got a lot more money to deal with. They're not our number one priority. We're just kind of throwing scraps and hoping that the teachers can get by, hoping that the students can get by without the resources that they need. You hear the teachers saying, well, they've promised us this extra $5,000. They promised it, but they're not seeing it. Because there's loopholes in that bill that are, the bill is written the way that it is to sound really good, but not actually deliver what the people are expecting it to deliver. So that's the first thing. We pay our teachers. We make sure our students have the resources. We make sure the classes aren't overcrowded. We do an overhaul. We need to make sure that the students are actually learning subjects based off peer reviewed articles and scientific information, as opposed to some of this sort of old school sort of approach. We need to modernize. Here we are. We're ready to be in step with the rest of the state, and let's do it.
Right. And everything you're saying, one of the things in my mind really quick is that here in this area, and I could be wrong about this, it seems like higher education is very, very sort of on the edge of, modernization. We just have this new medical college at UTRGV and all this stuff, but K through 12 it seems like there are some areas that are extremely neglected. So there's a little bit of disconnect there. So I think that yes, our community could greatly benefit from sort of funding well that entire pipeline. What if our K through 12 schools across the valley were as modernized and well funded as like the UT system branch down here that we have across the valley now? I mean, that would be such an incredible benefit for our area. I mean, that would change lives. The generational social mobility effects of that would be absolutely immense. But my question to you now, and this is actually something that I didn't look up, and I don't know if you have this information on hand, but in terms of that, right, and we've talked about how a lot of this money is being diverted to private school. We're talking about how money is being diverted to these immigration centers. Realistically, how much more funding could we get for public schools down? Like, how much money is there? Could we say, we could double the funds? Could we triple the funds? What are we talking about just tactically?
I think the sky's the limit. Look, it's really a matter of allocation. I mean, Texas, we need somebody in our state legislature can actually tell us where our money is going. You don't know, and I don't know, because we're not part of that tight-knit circle, right? But if we can get somebody in there that can break it down and say, look, 10% of the funding is going to this, 5% of the funding is going to this, then we can actually visibly, tangibly have something in front of us where we can make decisions and say, hey, look, this 5% allocated to whatever this is not really helping the people. This can go to education, or this can go to healthcare. There's zero transparency. So that's what's needed, is transparency, so we know where our tax dollars are going and what our leaders are doing with it. So yeah, I mean, we're left in the dark. So I don't know.
So much more equitable funding for education. What are some other areas that we can improve in terms of having more equality and more fair equity for everybody in the region?
Yeah, so just last week, I went and visited at one of our colonias, and when you drive into a colonia, you feel as if, I mean, I live in the middle of Brownsville, right? But when you drive into a colonia, you feel like you are on a different planet. There's no street lights. There's dogs running all over the neighborhood. There's mattresses packed on the side of the road. And I went and I talked to these families, and these families, I mean, you talked about not having bad internet. These families, their children can't do their schoolwork with this distance learning because they can't access the internet. They have to drive or get a ride or figure out how to get out of their neighborhood because they don't have cars to a place where they can access internet. They don't have health care. In this particular colonia, they would, one of the women that I spoke with said, well, once a month, a big mobile van will come in here and will check us and do sort of like routine checkups. But that's the extent of their health care. In the past 3 months, she had told me that 3 people had died in that colonia from stuff that probably could have been avoided because they just don't have the access. I mean, this is in the United States. This is right here in our neighborhoods. It's unfathomable that we have people living in those conditions. It's inexcusable, and I'm ashamed that this is where we are.
So we are talking about more equality, more fair equity for all citizens of the Rio Grande Valley with Sara Stapleton Barrera tonight. The call-in number is 956-224-9082. Sara just talked about a second strategy of sort of getting this done, having more equality, and that is what you're saying, basically creating infrastructure in these rural areas. And it is true, there's a great disparity between the rural areas of the Rio Grande Valley and what you would call commercial centers, more business-oriented centers, things like that. And just actually last week on the show, I got to talk about the CARES Act, federal funds, and the way that those funds were distributed in Hidalgo County. Initially, there was a huge controversy because the judge of the county, Cortez, he took it upon himself to change the per capita award that the state had set, and that Abbott and the people on the committees, on the finance committees, had gone out of their way to say, please give this to people equally. And Cortez went out of his way to give more money to the larger cities and keep less money distributed per capita to the rural areas. And all of his reasons for doing that didn't make any sense. I searched around, I couldn't make sense of it. Taking that example, why do you think in that particular example that the judge did that with those federal funds, and what does that represent in terms of the culture of funding and politics for these rural areas means in the Valley?
Look, it's all about the money to these guys. I mean, it's clear as day. And, when you've got a group of leaders and legislators that are thick as thieves, they're going to protect their own. And they're going to protect the people that help them stay in office. They're going to protect the people that give them money. I mean, it's so upside down. I mean, the natural reaction should be, oh, well, these people are really, really suffering. This is where we should allocate our funds, right? I mean, that's what I think
Absolutely.
normal people would sort of gravitate towards. But it's not that way, unfortunately, and it's just a matter of poor leadership.
It didn't turn out that way. The judge's actions on these particular funds showed how that gets put together, driving through these rural areas, these colonias, and then through these other cities that in this case were giving more awards, shows us just visually, viscerally, the difference between those areas that are not given support, that are not given funding. And Sara Stapleton Barrera is saying this is one of the things that she wants to work on top of education, is building infrastructure for these communities that need it so badly. So let's go further on your platform that you're running on. What are some of the other issues that you've been talking to people for the past couple of weeks as you move forward on your campaign?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk of education, a lot of talk of the infrastructure. One of the issues where Senator Lucio, and you touched upon it with SB 6, but where he's really, really failed us is on his discriminatory views regarding the LGBTQ community. I mean, SB 6 is just sort of like the iceberg. I mean, there was also SB 17, which gave employers a license to discriminate. And as an attorney, when I heard that, it was shocking to me. And I have friends that are, school counselors and that sort of stuff, and we're just appalled. The fact that somebody could come into my office, and if I didn't like the way that they looked, or if I thought that they were part of the LGBTQ community, I could turn them away. It is mind-blowing that we're in 2020, and that's where we are. And what else has he done? He's also, in 2015, he joined his Republican colleagues in the Senate to pass a resolution reaffirming the state's opposition to same-sex marriage. I mean, it's like he's, instead of progressing, he's trying to take us back 30 years. I just don't understand it. I just don't understand it.
Absolutely. I mean, I know that on the transgender bill SB 6, and I just commented, he tends to vote with the Republican side. The Republicans voted that. They wanted that. The Democratic Party at the time, nobody else in the Senate wanted that of the Democrats. His own son spoke out against it. And still, he put through this discriminatory bill. And I actually want to share with people on the show and share with you on these LGBTQ and transgender issues. I was actually having a conversation with a conservative gentleman from the Rio Grande Valley who owns a business. And I'm not going to say who he is, but we were talking about this exact thing. And I said, look, you have employees in your office. These employees have families. I know that you're conservative. Would you have, the brother of your employee come into your business who happens to be gay? Would you kick them out? And I said the specific person, because, and it was an example. I don't know their sexual orientation, but it was an example. I said, what if X person came in and he said he was gay? Would you kick him out? That's somebody in your like business network or whatever. and that made him think twice about it. I think if people are able to examine these issues on a much more personal level, they always find that what you're saying is correct. It's mind-blowing that people would behave this way, and absolutely mind-blowing that Eddie Lucio Jr. would enact it into law against the desire of even his own family. So very confusing. But again, we did share that quote earlier today, earlier on the show, about how he does not believe in the separation of church and state, and he believes some things about faith and morality that maybe some people might find pretty extreme. Pretty extreme. You mentioned Senate bill. You said it was 16?
I mentioned SB 17.
SB 17. Now, that's something I didn't provide any detail about on the show. What specifically was SB 17?
Right. So that was the license to discriminate.
License to discriminate. Okay.
Yeah.
And SB 6 was the bathroom bill. A lot of discriminatory legislation policies coming down for Senate District 27. And obviously, from what you're sharing, you would not support bills like this. We have reviewed a lot of bad stuff that has already been put together for the Valley. One of my questions is, how do we undo that? I mean, obviously, you're going to go into office. You know, these bills have already been voted on. Some of, a lot of them went through, some of them didn't. But, we have the immigration detention center in Raymondville. We've the whole issue with abortion. I mean, we have all of that going on. I guess just as even just a general political question, to be honest with you, is like, how do we undo that? You go into office, what happens to sort of roll that back?
You fight. I mean, you fight to amend the bill. You fight to undo the damage that has been done. Yeah, I mean, nothing that has been done means that it's going to be that way forever. So it's just a matter of getting somebody in that's brave enough who will stand up and say, "Hey, this is total BS. We've got to. This needs to be undone."
So bill amendments.
And it can be done. Right.
Bill amendment, and this is basic stuff for you. I mean, obviously, there's probably people watching on the show who already know this. I'll admit my ignorance. I do know a lot of what's covered, but in terms of the political process, you would go into office, and you yourself would have to sort of bring these amendments to the table.
Yeah.
To
so
a lot of these
what
bills.
A legislator does is, right. Yeah. A legislator, in theory, sits and writes legislation. And I have a really good plan on how to actually write legislation. So for so long, what Senator Lucio has done is he doesn't write his own legislation. He has lobbyists that give him money that write the legislation for him. Or he's got these consultants that, you talked about being the consultant for the detention center, consultants who come in and write this legislation for him. And then he can call himself an author or co-author of a bill and then present this bill to the rest of the Senate. That's not the way I intend on doing things. The way that I think that a bill and legislation needs to be written is with the people. And I'll give this example because it rang true to me. I mean, not too long ago, I met with a group of fishermen. I don't know anything about fishing. I don't know what their issues are, and when I spoke to them, they were able to describe to me the issues that they had as fishermen, regarding certain regulations and, certain things having to do with the waters. And those are the people that should be sitting with me at a table, pencil in hand, writing legislation that affects the fishermen. It's a collaborative effort. It's never been done that way down here, but that's what we need, and that's how it needs to be done. We need our state senator to sit in groups with the people who help craft legislation.
Got it. So this is a revelation to me, is the way that this legislation gets written. We can absolutely see what you're saying in terms of the way that Eddie Lucio is writing the legislation. It's more of a business almost, the way he hires out the legislation, the way that the lobbyists are the ones that are making decisions about what goes in there. We can see it just from the fruit of his labor, the results of the stuff that he's put together. You're saying shouldn't be. What should happen is that you are planning to come down and work closely with the community, have them be involved in writing the legislation, putting together the legislation that's ultimately going to affect them. That's not a radical idea. It's not a revolutionary idea. Maybe in this day and age, we're so used to not having that that it sounds radical, but it's actually, it's actually very straightforward. So
It's very simple. Yeah. It's, the thing is this, is that when you have, I think it should be illegal, right? When a senator is passed $100,000 check and says, and and the lobbyists say, okay, well, you are our consultant, but this is the way that we need things to be done. I mean, it's legal bribery. So there certainly needs to be some reform. It shouldn't be legal. No politician or public servant really should be making millions and millions of dollars off of a public servant position. A state senator, do you know what their yearly pay is? $7,000. It's $7,000. That's it. I mean, this is not a get rich sort of a scheme. It's a public servant position. And Senator Lucio has forgotten that 30 years ago.
My goodness. Absolutely. There's a lot of money involved in politics. And what Sarah is saying is true, because I know that I was reading about that on a national level in Congress, is that a lot of our laws get written by private interests, by companies, and they're submitted just like that to a vote in the Congress. And it should be the people's interest, not the business interest. And I guess, thank you for bringing that up. I really hadn't, I guess, seen it through that. I've seen this situation, District 27, through that reality, but that is the reality that's happening. I guess that's one of the reasons why we see a lot of the ways that Eddie Lucio Jr. does vote on his record. To going back to education, before you were a lawyer, you were also a teacher, correct?
I was, yes.
How long were you a teacher here? And you were a teacher here in the Rio Grande Valley, or?
I was a teacher here in Brownsville. It was a very short-lived career. I got into it, and I realized that it was the hardest job I have ever had. And I've had a lot of jobs. And it was, I would go home probably on a weekly basis crying, because it was, you're overworked, you're underpaid, you aren't getting the resources that you need, the tools that you need. My mom's a teacher, now she's a principal. My sister's a teacher. So it kind of felt like the thing for me to do. But it was hard, and you gotta love it. And our teachers down here are so much more worthy than they're given credit for, because, it's a hard job.
Absolutely. And, I laugh a little bit just because I've heard that story so many times, but the truth is that it is an unfortunate situation that teachers, and I think in many areas of the country, are super underpaid, and the job that they have to do is really beyond their resources. And of course, this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation in terms of needing more funding for that. How long were you a teacher in Brownsville?
1 year. So I graduated from undergrad, came home, taught for a year, and after that year, I went to law school, because I realized that, hey, I don't have longevity in this field, because it's just I didn't want to be taken advantage of, and that's what's happening. Right.
So I think that probably that experience was one of the things, or maybe even one of the reasons why a lot of your platform has to do with education now as a result of that. What are some other issues that are included in your platform that you've been sharing with people?
Yeah, just because it's on the top of my mind, because you were talking about it, is this issue with Lucio and the detention center. So, I've been an attorney for 10 years, and I've spent almost every day, for the past 10 years, in and out of those detention centers and in and out of those prisons. And, there's got to be major reform when it comes to the court systems. It's clear as day, with George Floyd and, all the issues that we're facing today, that the criminal justice system is not colorblind. The criminal justice system is completely broken, and major reform needs to happen. But we certainly do not need a legislator that sees a dollar sign with every inmate that walks by, or a dollar sign on any or on any immigrant that passes their path. So certainly criminal justice reform.
There's a lot, like we said, going on right now, and in my mind, and this could be incorrect, but in my mind, where I am right now, I have sort of not a total division, but some separation into categories of the issues now. Partially issues of colorism and race, which are cultural, psychological, and social. And then on the other one, structural issues of policy, economics, government, infrastructure, like the one we're talking about in these communities. Now, obviously, both are very connected in reality. Do you think that someone who represents the Senate District 27, Texas Senate District 27, obviously we're talking about all the policy side. We're talking about one category. I want to, I guess, ask you, what about the other sort of half of that? The cultural challenges of colorism, the cultural challenges of the classism and the racism and colorism, again, that exists in our community. Do you think that someone in your office has at least some responsibility to address that somehow? And have you thought about how, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what a great question. I grew up here, right? And I even remember as a little kid, you had this sort of sentiment, with the fairer skinned you were, the better off you may be. And the darker skinned you were, the more likely you were to be a criminal or whatever it may be. And it was the way that people would address it. I mean, even the little old ladies was very endearing, ay, el güero, or the colored eyes,
We've heard, yes, we've heard our own
yes,
families.
Yes.
In our community.
Unfortunately, what that did is it really, it created this culture of, this being good and this being bad. So it is certainly an issue that we deal with down here in South Texas. Now, we don't have an African American community as big as, in other parts of the state, but we definitely do see that colorism. And I feel like now more than ever, because of George Floyd, we're talking about it. This is the first time in a long time here in South Texas that people are talking about it, and people are marching, and people are opening their eyes, and people are researching what privilege means and what that looks like. And
right.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge, probably the number one problem in our system, is Lady Justice is indeed not blind like she claims to be.
What kind of leaders do you think that it falls on to make a difference in that cultural side of the roots of these structures? What kind of leaders in our community can we look to, I guess, make some change there culturally for us?
I don't think you can call yourself a leader unless you are actively trying to make a difference regarding this issue. I think anything beyond that is not a leader. If you're in a position of power or in a leadership position, you have a responsibility to make those aware, and you have a responsibility to use your platform and to try to make a difference.
Right.
Otherwise, you're no leader that I would like to follow.
Yeah. And I asked that question because I've asked myself that question over the past couple of days. And, leading up to this interview, obviously, any representative of a Senate district down here is a type of leader that deals with a lot of different issues. But obviously, it's going to take a lot of different kinds of leaders to pull us along into a new direction. And I even think about our religious institutions here. The diocese, the Catholic diocese, the Christian church. These are organizations that a lot of people in the Rio Grande Valley are very, very invested in, right? It's part of their community. What part can they play? Obviously, I think in their messages as well. And I'm not personally a religious person, but I do recognize that these are important institutions here in the Valley. Um, as one example of a different type of leader that should be helping us along to make these cultural changes, and not just in colorism and racism, but in a lot of other ways that we limit ourselves under a hegemony of ignorance is the term that I used. I think it was either the last show or on a social media post or something like that. But, I think it clicked for me even when I said it, was it's a hegemony of ignorance that we have here in the Rio Grande Valley that people who don't want to talk about these issues are protecting. People who don't want to change these horrible things like the Immigration Center are protecting. So, all this leads to my following question is, what do you think is really the biggest challenge of this election? Because, Eddie Lucio has been in office for 30 years, and people keep voting him in despite all these votes for a lot of different reasons. What keeps him entrenched in your mind? And then why do you think that would change in this election on July 14th? What are the reasons in your mind, or the ways that this could actually change?
Yeah. So we've already made history, right? Never in his 30 years has he had an opponent who has forced him into a runoff.
That's true.
Yeah. He's never really had a formidable opponent all these years. So he's this position he has not had to fight for. It's just basically kind of been cyclical and handed to him every 4 years. And
Right.
why? Because people are afraid. And when I said, "Hey guys, I'm going to run," people are like, "You're crazy." The Lucios are vindictive. The Lucios will tear you down. The Lucios have $1 bajillion and you don't. You name it. And I heard it. And that's why he's been in office for so long, because he's instilled fear in a lot of people, and people are afraid of, their businesses being ruined, or their political futures being ruined, or their livelihood being ruined.
Let's talk about that runoff just real quick, because I haven't mentioned it at all on my show. July 14th is a runoff election. I know not every viewer that's viewing tonight understands exactly what that is. We had a vote for this Senate district already. And what happened was that Eddie Lucio was not able to get enough of the majority of those votes to seal the deal, in other words, right? So it was too close, and you trailed him so closely that now we have to vote again, and that's what's happening on July 14th. And you're saying this is the first time that this has ever happened. Eddie Lucio Jr. not quite unseated, but definitely a run for his money, because he was not able to accomplish it in the last vote. And now he has. So that is what a runoff means. That's what's happening on July 14th, is we're sort of breaking that tie. And that's the situation. So I think that's a very good answer. It's very encouraging, actually. We're very close, and something has happened here that has never happened before. Sara Stapleton Barrera is much closer by a huge margin in terms of the context of the situation than anybody else has been. I'm seeing a question here from one of our Facebook Live watchers. Orlando Vargas says, Mrs. Barrera, are you worried about voter turnout at the polls due to the pandemic? And what is your stance on voter mail-in ballots due to the pandemic?
Yeah, so it's sort of like uncharted territory. Nobody really knows what to expect and what voter turnout is going to look like. So we're having to be very strategic, and make sure that we really excite our voters in my base to come out that day. So there's a lot of like one-on-one, hey, remember, hey, bring your family, let's do this.
Right.
Regarding the mail-ins, look, my position is that I don't want anybody catching COVID. I don't want anybody getting sick and dying over going to the voting polls, and I think that everybody should have been afforded the chance to vote by mail. I think that under the Constitution, we should have been provided it. I think that under the election rules, we should have been provided it. But unfortunately, the GOP doesn't quite see it the same way. So here we are. But I'm not afraid. I am really positive, that my supporters and everyone that is so ready for a change will come out and we'll get this thing done.
Absolutely. And I think that there's, I wanted to do two things on this interview, and we've hit upon both. One of them is, the big issues that affect everybody: school funding, mail-in voting. We talked about rural infrastructure. We hit a little bit upon transgender issues, LGBTQ issues, immigrant issues. I think it's really important that, yes, we do focus on those big issues of funding everybody and infrastructure, but I think that it's super important to pay just as much attention to these groups that are minorities, I guess, in a way, and maybe marginalized communities here, in our region. What are we going to do for them? And we've hit upon some of those points. So in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, Sara, are you willing to make deep changes, defunding, changing the laws maybe around policing as much as you can in our region? Are you willing to actually do something to take power, take money, take funding away from law enforcement and law enforcement organizations here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the hot issue right now. Look, as an attorney who's done criminal defense, this is an issue that really, hits me at the core, because I've seen how the policing has created problems. I mean, I've had clients myself that were beaten to a pulp, and we had to figure out, how to try to make right out of a wrong, right? But look, this is going to take more than reform. This is not like an issue where we can just, make a couple policy changes. This is much bigger than that. I mean, this is a complete overhaul that needs to be done. We need a new paradigm on policing in the United States. The system as is needs to be completely dismantled and reconstructed, not just changing a policy here and there. Like I said, we're still working with a model of policing in this country that was really born out of slavery in this country, that was born out of white supremacy in this country. So what needs to happen, right? Besides a complete overhaul, specifically, we've got to change this term use of force, the standard, because clearly the standard is not working. People are dying. We need mandatory independent investigations of police using force cases that result in death or injury. We abolish qualified immunity for officers, and we increase oversight of funding to state and local police departments. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. But yeah, I mean, what a loaded question. We need a complete overhaul.
Does that include organizations like ICE and Border Patrol for you in your mind?
Absolutely.
Especially in our community and all across the border in this country as well. We've hit upon a lot of different points for your platform, Sara. Thank you very much for being on the show tonight. I just want to mention one more time that the vote is happening on July the 14th. You still have 10 days to register to vote. I am going to be publishing and linking out on social media all the information you need to register to vote and any information you might need to actually vote on that day for the runoff. I think it's a very important vote, and anybody who's having conversations about all of these issues, which are all coming together in our minds now for us, needs to get out there, needs to make a decision about what kind of leadership they want for the Rio Grande Valley. They need to make a decision about whether or not they're serious in this particular case of voting to put someone in office who can really enact some of these changes. Like we mentioned before, it's obviously going to take a lot of different kinds of leadership, a lot of different kinds of social structural changes as we move forward. But July 14th is the day that we want to get this done, make this decision for our Rio Grande Valley community. Sara Stapleton, thank you so much for being on the show tonight.
Thank you for having me. There's no place I would rather be on my front porch with you guys here tonight. So I appreciate you.
Fantastic. Best of luck to you in the election, and we'll be waiting for those results. Rio Grande Valley, have a good night. Thanks for joining us on Hotline Live.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.